Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Pandemic Punditry's discussion with Varun Deshpande. He's the Managing Director for India for the Good Food Institute. So this conversation will be streaming via Zoom and Facebook Live today. Please send any questions you have for Varun by typing them in either the Q&A section on Zoom or on the comment section on Facebook. And Karthika today will moderate the questions for you and ask them on your behalf. So that's the sort of the general administrative stuff for today. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, Varun.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry I couldn't put a fancy background like Sandhya did last time. I actually tried. I'm not even going to lie. I actually tried. But you're looking at me in my home office the way I've been working every day during this period. So
that's right. I think all three of us are on the same thing. We toyed with the fancy background idea, but I think it requires a special sort of a screen thing to make work effectively. So Karthik,
well, Sandhya is a technologist, so you know, I mean, none of us obviously have her technological nous and her ability to do these things.
Sorry, no, Karthik, just stop sharing.
Okay.
All right. So, Varun, what we wanted to start with in terms of our conversation today with you was to give us sort of an idea, the audience especially, on what the Good Food Institute actually does.
Great. Yeah. So at the Good Food Institute, we are an international nonprofit with offices in India, the US, Brazil, Israel, East Asia, out of Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and then Europe, out of London and Brussels. So we're spread out all over the world. And we focus singularly on one specific problem. How are we going to feed 10 billion people through the year 2050 through systems which do not create negative impacts on the climate, on biodiversity, scarce natural resources, public health, including, yes, pandemics, and food security, right? We've examined the problems within this area. We've come to the conclusion that one specific area, which is protein, is a huge driver of all the things that I just mentioned. So what we do at the Good Food Institute is we've analyzed the problem of protein. The world currently gets its protein, or thinks it does, from animals. We have a protein supply chain that's set up to industrially farm animals at huge scales. It's called factory farming. Mm-hmm. And it has tremendous negative externalities on the world, which we'll talk about, of course, during this chat. So what we do at the Good Food Institute is we work with governments, entrepreneurs like Sandhya Shriram, investors, philanthropists, large corporations, scientists, and universities, pretty much anyone who can affect the supply of protein, which is set up to replace meat, eggs, and dairy without feeling like a sacrifice to consumers or to producers. And I'd love to talk further about that.
Oh, great. So, you know, so 2050, 10 billion people on the planet. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 1/6 of that is going to be in India, isn't it?
1/6 of it will be in India, yes. You know, over 50% will be in Asia. If you include Africa, we're talking something like 60 to 70%, maybe larger than of the world population. So, you know, these areas which have often been described as the global south or the developing world or the emerging markets, say it how you will,
right?
Low and middle income countries, etc. We are the ones that are going to be the linchpin of the food system in the future. As people get wealthier and wealthier in these countries, they start to demand more meat, eggs, and dairy, which are prestige foods, which are seen as aspirational. And we want to be able to satisfy that demand, but in ways that do not break the planet.
Okay, and you are sort of is the right characterization for GFI sort of a think tank maybe, or an advocacy? I mean, where in those sort of lexicon of sort of words would you describe yourself as?
So when you go right to the end of the list of the options where it says all of the above, that's what we are. So because we're a bit of a think tank, we're a bit of a do tank, we're a bit of an advocacy group, we're a bit of a pro bono consultancy. We do all of those things. Different stakeholder groups within the industry need different things. So you can think of us as end-to-end industry builders. Mm-hmm. So on the scientific side, what we will do is we'll identify really high impact product development and scientific research opportunities. Then we'll go out and raise grant purses, and we have competitive research grant programs where hundreds of universities all over the world apply. And last year we gave away about $4 million worth of grants, which is the largest grant purse by far anywhere in the world for our sector, to focus on really high impact opportunities. For entrepreneurs, we might help them in places like India where the ecosystem is still getting started. We help them with things as granular as business plans, introductions to investors, product formulation. Obviously, we prioritize. We work with entrepreneurs that we feel have the best chance of going to market and making a dent in the market. But we do all of those things that constitute hand-holding. We're also cultivating relationships with investors to actually get an incubator set up so that some of that stuff gets taken off our plate because it's quite effort intensive. We work with governments. This is the sort of strategic advisory or advocacy piece of what you just said. So we work with governments to understand why is this important, right? They already care about climate change, pandemics, jobs, manufacturing, farmers, crucially. Why is all of this stuff important and fitting within that landscape? Why is it a ignored white space in that landscape? And how can they invest in this? How can they give it a regulatory path to market? So we're really doing a lot of stuff across the industry to help build it from the ground up.
So how did you also kind of partner with the World Food Program and stuff as well? Or because I assume they had similar goals.
So it's interesting. I want to dive deeper into this area of nutrition and the World Food Program and that kind of stuff. But perhaps first we should define what kinds of foods we're talking about, right? Okay. So when I say we want to provide entrepreneurs, producers, and then consumers with the ability to formulate and serve and eat products which are designed to replace meat, egg, and dairy without feeling like a sacrifice, but rather just a simple switch, what do we mean? Yes. We mean these tremendously exciting categories of foods that are emerging now. If you've seen something about the Beyond Burger or the Impossible Burger or Just, which makes a scrambled egg out of mung beans, then you know what I mean when I say plant-based foods, right? So plant-based meats, for example, are set up to have the same sensory and cultural and texture and all of the resonance of meat, but they're made in a way that utilizes plants and crop ingredients only. So no slaughter involved, right? And because there's no slaughter involved, you don't have to grow all these crops to feed to a chicken and then transport that chicken under really tremendously bad conditions. We've all seen trucks, wire mesh trucks roaming around Mumbai, for example, that have these chickens cooped in together, that are fed antibiotics that breed diseases. And that's why we're seeing a lot of public health implications, not just COVID, but also things like bird flu, et cetera, roaming around. So with plant-based meats, you take all of that out. You take the proteins, amino acids, lipids, minerals, the stuff that already exists in crops, and you use them in a different way to make meat. So if you bite into a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger, or if you taste the Just egg, which, as I said, is made out of mung bean, it is very, very close, if not easy, to fool you in terms of being what it is designed to replace. Right. And it's actually impacted by stealth, because for all the reasons that I just mentioned in terms of transport and raising them and all the crops, if you replace one of the 3 beef burgers that Americans eat on average every week with one Beyond Burger, just 1 out of 3, it will be the equivalent of taking 12.2 million cars off the road or powering 2.3 million additional homes, right? Wow. That is the impact we're talking about.
Just one.
Yeah.
1 out of the 3.
1 out of the 3. And look, again, the impact for consumers is not to hammer them over the head and say, eat less meat, switch this out, do this, do that. Eat it because it's delicious, because it's giving you what you wanted on the basis of taste and price and convenience. It's served everywhere you want it to be, right? And that's the goal of that industry. But you're having impact by stealth, right? So that's one category, is the plant-based foods. They're already out in the market. Beyond Meat went public on the New York Stock Exchange last year. By far the most successful IPO for any company valued over $100 million in the last 20 years, right? And that's in a year when Uber also went public and WeWork had its fiasco and all of that stuff, right? So, you know, completely beating the pants of all the other tech companies. There are other categories that I'm talking about. We're also talking about fermentation-based ingredients and categories. So these are things that are really interesting, like yeast and mushrooms and fungi, where we're really scraping the surface of what's possible in that world. And with relatively low technology, you can really get amazing products. And you're going to see a lot coming out there as well. There's very little that's on the market already. Right. Another one is cultivated meat, which is what you had Sandhya Sriram on for last week, right?
And actually, we're going to have Pete on also to talk about the fermentation stuff as well soon.
Oh, Pete Luba? Nice.
Yes,
okay.
Luba. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So Sandhya Sriram talked about how her company, Shiok Meats, makes shrimp from cells instead of by farming shrimp. The reason to do this, again, is very simple. Farming is filthy. It involves animal waste. It involves sometimes sewage in the case of shrimp. It involves antibiotics. It involves all of those things. So why don't we cut out the middle animal, so to speak, and just farm the cells directly? That's what the industry of cultivated meat is seeking to do. Now, when that started in 2015, there were about 4 companies that were doing it. Today in 2020, there's 60 plus companies that are doing it, right? The amount of investment that's gone into it is massive, right? So all of those companies are racing to market. No one's on the market yet. Plant-based meats is kind of the leading edge. And then you have cultivated meat. And then, in the middle, you have fermentation-based ingredients that are racing to market as well. So all of this stuff is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And I think I read somewhere, I think it was in the Financial Times of all places, that by 2050, a majority of the so-called meat that we consume will be either cultivated or plant-based. That the amount of the meat, animal-derived protein will be less proportionately than that of the other the sources. I mean, that's an amazing sort of number.
I want to address the projections. I also want to say why, right? The reason this is happening is because there is convergence on the need to do this. So consumers are saying, we want to have less of an ecological footprint on this planet. The reason we are talking right now, the reason you're doing this series right now is because a pandemic broke the world.
Yeah.
Right? And the causes of that pandemic are because of humans' ecological footprint on the planet. Right? Yeah. Whether it's deforestation or whether it's experimentation, I think that's a debate that's being played out as it currently stands, whether it's wet markets or whether it came from a lab or whatever may be the case, right? It's because of humans' ecological footprint on this planet, right? On the other side, also, you're seeing, because consumers are converging on this idea that, let's move away from having such a large impact on the planet, particularly younger consumers who are saying they really are cognizant of these problems and would like to move away from the things that cause them, like eating meat.
Right.
You have producers, large companies, small companies, entrepreneurs, all saying, look, we want to transform ourselves from being meat companies, legacy meat companies, into being protein companies. The CEO of Tyson Foods, which is America's largest meat producer and the second largest in the world, was quoted a couple of years ago saying, if we can grow meat without the animal, why wouldn't we? And they've made multiple investments in our sector. They've done very well financially out of it, right? So the goal here is you're seeing promise on both sides of the aisle and people coming together. And we just have to make sure that people are included in this future of food, whether it's the farmers themselves who are growing food to a great degree, whether it's companies that are processing, branding, and selling products, whether it's entrepreneurs who are on that side as well, and whether it's consumers. And when you see all of these things come together as they are right now, that's why you're seeing projections, as you said, Lavindra, that in 2050, 2040, we're going to see a certain percentage of meat just be plant-based or cultivated. You won't have legacy meat because it's just an inferior product. Animals are just really bad protein production platforms.
Right. And I think we have a slide on the smart protein thing, Karthika, if you want to just flash that. Yeah. And I think that, I just put this together largely because I thought it addresses what you're saying, right? So essentially, this is actually on the imminent future part is actually micro technologies. So, as you said, factory farms, and then you have these very sort of inhumane, cruel, and filthy sort of processing that goes on. And this is some of the cleaner pictures I could find. And then you have the other side, which is almost like a brewery, right? Where either fermentation technologies, you can stop the sharing. So it essentially create these new smart proteins. So I think this is, technologically speaking, it seems like we are transforming this very inefficient, where you take 1,800 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. That just sounds. Can countries like India and Asia, which is going to have a larger percentage of this whole food burden, can they afford to grow or produce milk, dairy, and eggs the same way they've been doing, ecologically speaking?
No. So here's the problem, right? So in India, if you look at per capita consumption of meat, it's quite low. We're the lowest in the world, or among the lowest in the world. So a lot of people might think, why do this in India? This is mainly for Western countries where they're eating a lot of meat. But like I said earlier, what happens to lower income countries as people get wealthier, they continue to crave and demand more and more animal sourced foods, meat, eggs, dairy, because those are prestige foods. They're seen as aspirational, right?
Right.
So everywhere in the world, everything we are talking about has been known for a couple of decades, right? It has been intellectually known. It has been academically known for a couple of decades.
And the scientists have been telling us for a couple of decades as well.
Yeah, and nothing changed,
Yeah,
right?
nothing.
People have been talking about the impact of animal agriculture, industrial animal agriculture, large scale on the planet for a long while.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that allow people to change over are simple stuff like taste, price, convenience. That has to be the theory of change. As Indians and countries like India get more and more embedded in meat consumption, we run the risk of undoing all the good work that we're doing in various other areas of climate advocacy and climate resilience, right? Everything we're seeing right now, by the way, during the pandemic, where you're seeing stranded migrant workers, where you're seeing people who are essentially pandemic refugees, will play out in a much bigger way when climate change really hits the roof, right? That's what is going to happen. People who are vulnerable suffer the most during times of vulnerability. It's baked into the definition of vulnerability, right?
Correct.
That's what is going to happen. We can scarcely afford this. The intensive demands of industrial animal agriculture, like you said, per kg of beef or per kg of chicken. You know, chickens emit 40 to 60 times, depending on which projection you look at, more carbon dioxide per calorie of protein than lentils. Protein.
40 to
Okay?
60 times. Wow.
Yeah. Why? Because look, you have to feed a chicken, all right? While you and I are sitting here talking to each other, we're burning calories, right? A chicken is walking around, breathing, metabolizing, growing feathers, etc., etc. It's a living biological organism, so it's expending calories. Therefore, in order to grow a chicken, you have to feed it 9 calories of input, which is crops like corn, soy, wheat, and get out 1 calorie of output in the form of meat or flesh. Now that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm a lapsed engineer, but it's a pretty bad system, right? Like that doesn't make sense intellectually. It makes no sense. And by the way, the reason that we have large scale deforestation, the reason that we have all of these issues boils down to that one simple reason. As I said, animals are terrible protein production platforms. So we use these vast swaths of land. Something like 70% of all available agricultural land in the world is used to grow crops for or to graze animals. So you're seeing deforestation in the Amazon. You saw the Amazon was on fire for several weeks last year,
right,
which seems like a distant memory in the face of the things that we're facing now, I guess. But the Amazon was on fire for several weeks last year. The primary cause of encroachment upon the Amazon that leads to problems like that is livestock farmers, right? They have an economic imperative to continue doing that. We have to present them with alternatives. And that's what I mean when I say in countries like India, to your question, Lavindra, in countries like India, we need to make sure that everyone is coming through into this future of food and is included in it. But we simply cannot afford to continue doing things the way we've been doing.
100% agree. But I do hear from some people who keep telling me, oh, no, India, we don't have factory farming. Our meat is free range, organic, in fact. Is that actually true? Because, and I have this debate with, various people on a regular basis saying, oh, this is we don't have factory farms in India. I mean,
we already do for eggs. So the difference in India is that everything is more labor intensive, but that doesn't mean that we don't have large scale operations, right? So whereas in Australia or in the US, you have these 800,000 layer egg operations where you only have like 5 people operating them for like 1 million hens, right? In India, you'll have 100 people operating it. That's because labor is cheap, but that doesn't mean we don't have operations of that scale. If you talk to the companies that set up poultry processing facilities in places like India, they will tell you that they're seeing 25% demand growth domestically into the future. Domestically, not for export. All right. Now, this is COVID-19 notwithstanding, because for economic reasons, things are going to go a little bit into the doldrums for every industry. And then there might be perceptions of meat also, which our industry should totally plug that gap and give people what they want. But if you talk to them at the end of 2019, let's say, this is what they were telling me. So poultry processing facilities need to scale up. The best way to scale up something is to do it in an industrial manner, right? You're not going to scale it up efficiently and keep the price at the point that consumers want it unless you scale it up in the same way, which is concentrated animal feeding operations or factory farms or industrial animal agriculture. The things that I'm telling you right now, 9 calories in, 1 calorie out, these are hard biological limits in the most efficient operations, right? So in the US, where they have intensified over decades and they've bumped up against hard biological limits, that's what you reach. We can't get much better than that. I'm sure you can find some way to incrementally improve it on the margin, and you might get 8.8 calories in for 1 calorie out. But feeding a growing world in places like India, Africa, Southeast Asia requires a paradigm shift, not incremental improvements. That's not going to work.
Katya, did you have a question from the audience?
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, how, if for a youngster going into university, how does the job market now change with the advent of, you know, things like plant-based meat and cell-based meat and things like that? What are the options available?
So there are tons of options available, and an industry that's growing very rapidly that simply cannot fill all the jobs that it needs to fill. So you talk to Sandhya, and I'm sure she told you, you know, we work closely with all of these companies. I'm sure she told you that they actually need not just cell culture, they need engineering talent, they need marketing talent, they need food talent, because you're looking to take a process that's essentially been perfected in medicine, and you're looking to scale it up to food grade, right? And you need a lot of talent coming in from different places. You need design talent, you need industrial design talent. There's a lot of stuff that you need. So I would say, as anyone that's going into school, I would say, of course, look at disciplines, but also look at problems that you're trying to solve. Now, the disciplines that make sense for our industry are very simple. It's things like food science, food technology, even marketing and business, by the way, even policy, but directly working on products. It's food science, food technology, biomedical science, you know, things like cell culture, things like chemical engineering, industrial design, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things that are involved with actually formulating and scaling up products, right? What's really interesting, I think I want to take this question to a broader scale. We have colleagues at the Good Food Institute India who are food scientists by training, right? Lavindra, you know Shardul very well.
Yes, I do.
He comes from the National Institute of Food Technology, Entrepreneurship and Management. Okay, this is one of the best universities in India for food technology. It's north of Delhi. It's directly under the Ministry of Food Processing Industries. It's a bit of a darling institute for the government of India. People who graduate, students who graduate from there are still having to take up jobs on a factory floor that are deeply unglamorous, that don't pay well at all. I mean, really, really badly, right? And that are deeply unexciting. Well, if you're in a place like India, our sector offers you an innovative route to put your skills to use, as long as you are actually looking into the problem and trying to think through how you might fit into that jigsaw puzzle. It gives you an opportunity to access better pay, right? Work on more interesting problems and deploy your skills to really, really challenging questions, which I think everyone should have the ability to do that, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
We just had a question coming up from Srinivas. Thanks for joining us today. With the exception of plant-based meat, what other categories do you think will grow within the plant-based space?
Yeah, so within the plant-based space, it's not just plant-based meats, it's also plant-based egg and dairy applications. So there's a lot that's going on that front. Plant-based dairy has offered a clue as to what may happen in the plant-based meat space, because plant-based dairy, at least the generation 1.0 of plant-based dairy, is less complex to formulate, right? Less complex to get a product on the market. So it has captured something like, I think it's about 15 or 16% of the entire US market of dairy, okay, as of last year, 2019 or 2018. So what we think is, if you take plant-based meat, which is currently about 1% of the meat market in the US, and bring it up to parity there, that's a huge opportunity to run, right? So plant-based dairy is kind of like the OG of the plant-based food space. Plant-based eggs are also really interesting. You know, 1.4 trillion eggs are eaten every year. It's the widest consumed protein anywhere in the world. It's why a company called Just, which makes eggs from moonbeams, got into that space. And you're seeing a couple of other companies in India also looking into that. Of course, it makes sense to look into that, right? So eggs are really, really interesting, and eggs are really, really versatile also. So it doesn't have to be just a liquid egg to scramble at home or an omelette to make at home and in food service, as Just has been doing. It could also be powder, right? Egg powder that you reconstitute, depending on whether you have access to distribution channels that are chilled or frozen in your geography. Right. Sorry for the background noise. It could also be eggs for bakery applications only. So if you give large corporations an option to switch out eggs, so that everyone can eat the product in a place like India where many people don't want to eat eggs because they are considered non-vegetarian, of course they'll switch it out, but it has to satisfy the same taste and the functionality. The dough has to rise the same way. All of that stuff has to be true, right? And then, as I said, milks are really, really interesting as well. What's happening in milks is also super interesting because I think the 1.0 that helped to forge the path ahead has now been supplanted by really cool, futuristic new products that have the same creamy mouthfeel of milk from a cow, that have the same application. So it performs the same way in tea and performs the same way in desserts and all of that. So there's a lot that's possible, right? Like this story has a long way still to go within plant-based. I should also say that fermentation and cultivated meat are super, super exciting as well.
Yeah. And I think what was fascinating for me when I was at Anuga in September last year is the sheer variety and diversity of these alt protein products. I mean, everything from ice cream, butter, cheese, cream cheese. I mean, there's nothing sort of, all the different meats. I mean, everything is replaceable essentially, right? And I think we're also moving with these micro technologies on the fermentation.
We just had another question coming in, Lavi, from Jeevan. Thanks for joining us today. So Jeevan's question is, solarfoods.fi is an example of a company that plans to sidestep the entire photosynthetic cycle and convert CO2 into proteins, amino acids, etc. How far are we from this becoming true?
I want to mesh what Lavi just said with this. So basically, pretty much everything is going to boil down, as I said, to taste and price. So everything is replaceable, Lavindra, but also are you satisfying taste and price? And by the way, in price sensitive markets, people don't sacrifice taste either. So you have to you have to bring the cost down to that extent, but still satisfy the taste. Indians are not going to give it up. So that's the super interesting piece, right? Companies that are really interesting and futuristic, like Solar Foods. Another one is Kiverdi. Another one in Bangalore is called, wow, Ezil is going to kill me for this, but I'll just look it up and get back to you. There's another company like that in Bangalore, String Bio, excuse me. And they're using platforms like microbes to actually take in any feedstock. It could be CO2 in the case of Solar Foods. It could be methane in the case of String Bio, and give you protein, food grade protein for consumption by humans. It's a different kind of fermentation called precision fermentation, right? By the way, it's also deployed by Impossible Foods, right? Lavindra, you know this, to make its secret sauce ingredient, which is heme. So it's the same technology, except they're using it to make huge scale protein. The main consideration here is going to be the cost basis. So it's going to take some time to get to the scale where you can drive down the cost enough to have it be used as a bulk protein ingredient. Companies like Perfect Day, which makes milk proteins using a similar process, are already sort of on the market or coming onto the market now. What they have found is, again, the same cost consideration, as I said earlier, is it's a bit of a stricture. So basically, they are now going in and saying, we will manufacture dairy protein, which is identical to cow's dairy protein, but it will be one component of a plant-based ice cream. So you have the dairy protein that we make, which is our proprietary ingredient. Then you have a plant-based ice cream. And because we put in that dairy protein, it's more creamy than a regular plant-based ice cream. So I mean, look, I think what's going to happen, and I know I'm speaking about many technologies, and I think it might get confusing, but what's going to happen is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're not going to think about technology. We're going to think about brands and food, right? Just like, 40, 50 years ago, we weren't thinking about the specific milling process you were using to make a new type of bread, right? Those things really, once we move forward and consumers get used to the concepts and really like the products, that's what is going to matter into the future, taste and price.
Okay, so we have one more question coming in. Are there any cultured meat companies based in India, and how popular and effective are they?
So there's one cultivated meat company called Clear Meat, which is based in Delhi, which we helped put together a couple of years ago. As with every other cultivated meat company, they are focused currently on creating prototypes, conducting tastings, raising further funds, and then racing towards market by bringing down the cost basis, etc. Some of these companies internationally are also looking now at just making tools for the industry. So not making the entire end product, but making some of the tools that those companies need to bring a product to market. you should stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot more that's coming out. We're actually working with several people in large scale industrial manufacturing and biopharmaceutical companies who have decades of experience in those industries to see if they are interested in founding companies in that sphere, because that's the kind of expertise that's needed to really accelerate the industry.
So I know that we are sort of on time, Varun. I mean, happy to go on for a couple more minutes, but I think the takeaway that I'm getting from all of this, I think, is that I think we are completely transforming the agricultural process, or the process of how we generate protein, right? I mean, it's finally coming to the 21st century. We're using technology, our biological sciences, right? We've really now moved from sort of a very primitive, inefficient, as you say, 9-to-1 ratio. I mean, if that was happening in the corporate world, that process would be sort of dismantled within hours, right? If you had something that you took 9 to make 1, any company would just say, that's incredibly inefficient. Why are we even doing that? So I think we're finally sort of getting the 21st century process here of really transforming the food. And this is what I think the reason that we put this series on within Pandemic Punditry on, putting the planet on a pandemic diet, was to actually expose our viewership to essentially the idea that, there is an alternative. It's actually right here. I mean, it's so close that, in a year, it could just break away to something completely different. And I think, and the sheer breadth of it, I mean, the fact that, it runs the gamut, it's being manufactured. I mean, companies in India, companies in the US, everywhere are actually working on it. And as you said, over 60 plus companies on the cell-based side alone, and the plant-based side is much bigger. I think it just goes to show that, we have alternatives now. And with this pandemic, I think a lot of people are reflecting on, what we were doing. And I think I used to run Weight Watchers website once, and we always used to have the highest peak on January 1 when everybody's New Year resolutions were hitting, and they were like, oh, I have to go to Weight Watchers. I got to lose some pounds. And I think hopefully the pandemic is an event like that, where people are reflecting on their choices of their dietary choices and saying, you know what, maybe this is all self-inflicted on us, and we should really rethink what we eat. And I think the number is that 25% of Americans between 18 and 34 consider themselves vegetarian and vegan now. I mean, so the young, I think, of the world are actually, the millennials are waking up to this idea that we just can't sustain this. And I think that's a good sign. So any closing thoughts before we tie up for the day, Varun?
Everything you said is extremely exciting. It's why the Good Food Institute exists, to build that, to accelerate it. And really in places like India, we're doing it from the ground up, right? I just want to say a couple of things about the specific mission in India, the mission for smart protein in India. Mm-hmm. Everything that's happening globally, as I said, is breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. It's deeply encouraging, and it shows that we can do things now that weren't possible before, mm-hmm. to not necessarily put the planet on a pandemic diet, but give the planet the option of taking up a pandemic diet, which is fantastic. I think that we now need to take a lot of what's happening internationally and relentlessly, unforgivingly put an emerging markets lens on it immediately, right now. Because if we don't, looking out into the future, the groups in countries like India that want to eat meat will continue eating more and more meat. If we want to meet those people where they are, if we want to meet our population where it is, we have to apply a cost and nutrition lens to this that is relentless. We have to see this as an opportunity to literally nourish 10 billion people by the year 2050, right? This isn't just a narrative of scarcity. We also have to make affordable, sustainable, nutritious protein abundant. It is also a narrative of abundance. We have to see this as an opportunity to nourish our world in places like India, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. And what that means is a lot of work over the next decades towards driving down the price relentlessly, towards meeting people where they are. So if you have an urban slum in Mumbai and a family of 4 saying that they'd like to eat one mutton meal a week, and mutton is sheep or goat's meat. Mm-hmm. They'd like to eat one mutton meal a week and it costs them 460 rupees. But it brings people together, it's prestigious, and they like it, it's tasty, right? It's a signal of status. If they could eat 2 mutton meals a week for 920 rupees, they absolutely would. We want to meet them where they are, give them products and foods that taste the same or better and cost the same or less than what they want, so that they can actually make a switch without having to sacrifice. That is the scale and the bar that we should be setting for this industry. It's a very high one, but it's one that's worth setting. That's what I wanted to say in closing.
Thank you, and completely achievable. Karthika, if you can put up the last slide.
Yeah, of course. And also, we have a few more questions come through, Varun. Can I email them to you so that you can maybe, when you have some time, answer them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to.
All right, thanks.
So, next week on Friday, May 29th, we're going to have Ryan Betancourt, and Ryan is famous for being on Shark Tank and getting Mark Cuban to invest more than $500,000 in his company Wild Earth, and also Ryan is a part of Babel Ventures, and I think they've recently invested in an egg alternative company in India, I believe, Varun, Evo Foods,
yep.
Correct?
Yep.
So he's done that. So a very exciting personality. We're looking forward to talking to Brian, and we have a couple of other sort of speakers coming up in this series to round out sort of our take on putting the planet on a pandemic diet, or keeping, as Varun says, creating opportunities for people to adapt a pandemic friendly or a planet friendly diet, right? So thank you so much, Varun, for joining us today. As usual, it's been a singular pleasure talking to you. You have all of the facts at your fingertips, and for giving us sort of a broad brush overview of the industry as it stands today, so that some of the conversations we're having with various parties slot in nicely into the narrative that you've woven so very eloquently this afternoon for us. So
thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure as well, Lavindra. Thank you, Karthika. If anyone wants to get in touch with us, please reach out to us at india@gfi.org. I'm sure we can send it out after this, or just look us up at gfi.org. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.